A verdict is being announced in the trial of a Colorado man accused of murdering his wife by poisoning her protein shakes. We're going to bring in Whitney Wild right now as this is being about to be read out in the courtroom. And Whitney, okay, forgive me here. The control room is going to walk us through. On the first count, he has been found guilty. That first count is murder in the first degree, which is a Class 1 felony. That is the first of 6 counts that are about to continue to be read. But Whitney, guilty on murder in the first degree. And again, forgive me if I have to cut you off because, again, this is just coming into our control room.
Yep, no, you're right. So, yep, it's murder in the first degree. And then, Casey, I can tell you what the other charges that he's been found guilty of are. It's solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence. He was found guilty of that. There were 2 counts of that. He was found guilty on both of those counts. Solicitation to commit perjury was another charge he was facing. He was found guilty on that. And then solicitation to commit murder. He was found guilty on that. Casey, this is basically a clean sheet for the most part of a guilty verdict against James Craig. And for viewers who are not, completely caught up on this case case centers on a man named James Craig. He's from a suburb of Denver, Colorado, and prosecutors had accused him, and now a jury agrees that he killed his wife, Angela Craig, over a 10-day period in March of 2023 by poisoning her protein shakes, by switching out antibiotics and filling them with cyanide, and then having someone else administer those pills to her as she was trying to recover from these poisonings. Casey, prosecutors had brought forth this theory that he intended to kill Angela Craig because he had fallen in love with a woman named Karen Kane, but she was one in a long line of women that he had had affairs with. And so prosecutors, again, really leaned into this idea that, it came to the point where James Craig was facing all of these problems in his life. He was facing financial problems at work. He was in love with the woman he had lied to, had claimed he was divorcing his wife. And so he needed to find solutions to all of these problems. And if he could just kill his wife, that would solve his list of problems. And prosecutors say that was the motivation here. We cannot know in this moment what piece of evidence or what argument it was that convinced a jury that he was guilty on these counts. And Casey, I'll tell you, in all of these, cases I've covered, in about a decade and a half of covering criminal cases, I'm always surprised at the evidence that jurors really latch onto. So maybe we will learn more about that. Casey, the defense had put on, had basically put on an argument, a theory that Angela Craig was suicidal. They presented no witnesses. James Craig did not testify. They were aggressive in their cross-examination, but again, the facts that they put on were slimmed down compared to the long list of witnesses that prosecutors brought. They brought 48 witnesses in 2 weeks, and we now know that jurors agree that he is guilty of this long list of charges here. Most importantly, murder in the first degree. He is now facing life behind bars. Our understanding is that prosecutors are going to request they go straight into the sentencing phase of this case, Casey.
Well, and again, Whitney, let's run down exactly what we've learned here in the last few minutes. As you note, James Craig found guilty on count 1 of murder in the first degree, a Class 1 felony. Guilty on count 2, solicitation to commit tampering with evidence. Count 3, also guilty, the same charge as count 2. Count 4, solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree, guilty. Count 5, solicitation to commit murder in the first degree, guilty. Count 6, solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree, also guilty. And Whitney, I'm a little stuck on you saying he thinks this was the solution to all of his problems, that he had all these issues in his life, and if he could just do this, kill his wife, many of those problems would go away. Obviously now he's got more problems than ever before. How long did it take this jury to come to this decision? It doesn't seem as though there was a lot of doubt necessarily.
They took about 8.5 hours to deliberate, Casey. Closing arguments were yesterday morning. The jury went into their deliberations yesterday afternoon. They did ask one question. They requested transcripts from 2 witnesses. A judge said that she was not going to supply them with those transcripts. In some cases, you can get them. In this case, you could not. So after that, we figured it was going to go pretty quickly. And again, this is about 8.5 hours of deliberation. So, what is that, about an hour and 15 minutes, hour 20 minutes for each charge here, Casey. It's interesting because that. Again, this idea that Angela Craig was the source of all of his problems and she just needed to go away. There were several pieces of information that prosecutors brought forward. There was one woman, again, as I had said before, he had a long list of women that he had affairs with. And there was one woman who said that she was having an affair with James Craig, and they were talking about this movie, The Purge. And The Purge, if you don't know what The Purge is, it's this movie where for a period of time, everything's legal, violent crimes legal, murder's legal. And as they were talking about this movie, James Craig said that he would purge his wife. And prosecutors brought that moment back up in their closing arguments yesterday and saying, again, remember, he said if he could, he would kill his wife. And then they said, and he, as they know, he did do that over that 10-day period in March of 2023, Casey. So, extraordinary, compelling testimony. Some of it came from his own children. Two of his daughters testified. One of them, Casey, testified that once he was behind bars, he asked her to create a deep fake video that would make Angela Craig look as if she had asked him for poison so that she could commit suicide many weeks before her death. Again, this is tied to some of these other counts of solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence. There were many subplots here. One of the subplots was that he was trying to convince people to produce false evidence. And then finally, Casey, we haven't even gotten to this. There was another subplot here where once he was behind bars, he was trying to basically concoct a murder for hire plot to kill 4 people, including the lead investigators in this case, Casey.
All right, Whitney, we actually do have now the video of what played out in the courtroom as this verdict was read, finding James Craig guilty of murdering his wife by poisoning her protein shakes. Let's watch what happened in court.
As to verdict form, count 1, murder in the first degree. We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of murder in the first degree. Verdict form, count 2, solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence, Annabelle Craig. We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence. Verdict form, count 3, solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence, Casey Bohannon. We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence. Verdict form, count 4, solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree, William Walden. We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree. Verdict form, count 5, solicitation to commit murder in the first degree, Nathaniel Harris. We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of solicitation to commit murder in the first degree. Verdict form, count 6, solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree as to Kassiani Constantinidis. We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree. As to verdict form, count 7, manslaughter, cause or aid suicide, we, the jury, find the defendant, James Craig, not guilty of manslaughter, cause or aid suicide. Let me then turn to the foreperson and ask, is this the verdict of the jury? Do all of you agree with this verdict?
Yes, we do.
At this point in time, you can be seated. Let me ask then if either party wishes to have the jury pulled from the people,
No, Your Honor.
from the defense?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm going to just for, so that you are
All right,
aware.
we were watching their tape of the reading of the verdict in the trial of James Craig, who has been found guilty of murdering his wife by poisoning her protein shakes.